You're not welcome here. Take your broke ass somewhere else. Gregory Pike's voice cut through the dining room as he stepped in close, his smile sharp with contempt. Reservations only, he added, louder now, making sure nearby tables heard. We maintain standards here. Elias Grant stood still, saying nothing, his navy blazer and calm posture doing nothing to change the judgment already written across Gregory's face. Before Elias could respond, Gregory grabbed a plate from a passing server and flipped it. Hot pasta crashing over Elias's head. Red sauce soaking into his clothes and sliding onto the table beneath him. The entire room went quiet, conversations dying as heads turned and phones slowly lifted to capture every second. Gregory just stood there grinning like it was entertainment. And not a single person in that room realized the quiet black man they were watching had the power to decide all of their futures. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The evening air bit at Elias Grant's face as he stepped from his car onto the sidewalk. Chicago's famous wind whipped around the corners of downtown buildings, carrying the first hint of winter despite the calendar still showing fall. He paused, looking up at the elegant facade of Verdant Table. His creation, his legacy, bathed in warm golden light that spilled from its windows onto the darkening street. Ellis adjusted the collar of his simple navy sweater. No suit tonight, no tie, just dark jeans and comfortable shoes after the long flight back from Portland. The expansion meetings had been exhausting but successful. 3 days of negotiations, handshakes, and property tours had left him drained. But something had been nagging at him. Small complaints trickling in. Subtle shifts in the numbers. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make him curious. Will you be needing the car again tonight, sir? The driver asked. No, thank you. That'll be all, Elias replied, his voice quiet but firm. He watched the sleek black car pull away, leaving him alone on the sidewalk. Better this way. No announcement, no special treatment, just a man wanting dinner at a restaurant that happened to be his own. Ellis observed the valet stand first. 3 young men in crisp uniforms managed a steady flow of vehicles. Their movements were efficient but mechanical. No warm smiles. No genuine welcome, just practiced motions like actors hitting their marks. He frowned slightly and moved toward the entrance. The heavy glass door opened to reveal the familiar space that had once been just a dream sketched on napkins. Rich woods, soft lighting, the subtle scent of herbs and butter. The dining room hummed with conversation and the gentle clink of silverware against fine china. Elias paused, taking it all in. His eyes scanned the floor, noting at least 6 empty tables despite the busy hour. The bar was half full. The private dining alcove sat empty. At the hostess stand, a young woman, Lena, he recalled hiring her about 8 months ago, tapped at a tablet screen. She glanced up at him with practiced politeness that cooled the instant their eyes met. The smile never reached her eyes. Good evening, Elias said. Table for 1, please. Lena's gaze flicked over his casual attire, then back to her tablet. I'm sorry. We're fully booked for the evening. Elias glanced pointedly at the empty tables visible behind her. I see several available tables. Those are reserved, she replied, not bothering to check her system. Perhaps you'd like to try our bar, or I could recommend somewhere else nearby. The door opened behind him. A couple in their 40s entered. The man in a decent but unremarkable suit, the woman in a simple black dress. They were well-dressed, but not extravagantly so. Good evening. Welcome to Verdant Table. Lena's entire demeanor transformed. Her smile widened, her voice lifted. Do you have a reservation with us tonight? No, I'm afraid we don't, the man replied. We were hoping you might have something available. Let me see what I can do for you. Lena's fingers danced across the tablet. We actually just had a cancellation. Would you prefer something near the window or closer to our fireplace? Elias watched the interaction with growing discomfort. The difference was unmistakable. He studied the staff moving through the dining room, their postures, their interactions. Everything looked polished on the surface, but something was off. Servers moved with tension in their shoulders. Smiles appeared and disappeared too quickly. Courtesy without warmth. When had this happened? When had his restaurant become a place of performance rather than hospitality? "Excuse me," Elias said calmly once the couple had been escorted away. "I couldn't help but notice those guests were accommodated without a reservation while I was told you're fully booked. Could you clarify?" Lena stiffened. Her eyes started to the right toward the bar. "As I mentioned, we had a cancellation just now between my request and theirs." "Sir, I don't appreciate the implication." Her voice lowered. "I'll call my manager if there's a problem." "I think that's a good idea," Elias said evenly. Lena pressed a button on her earpiece and murmured something Elias couldn't hear. Less than 30 seconds later, Gregory Pike emerged from the dining room. Ellis observed the man he'd hired 6 months ago on recommendation. Gregory moved with practiced confidence, his shirt perfectly pressed, his tie a perfect Windsor knot. His smile was immaculate and completely empty. "Good evening, sir. Is there something I can help you with?" Gregory's tone was professional, but carried an undercurrent of condescension. "Yes, I'd like to understand why I was denied a table when there are clearly empty ones available, and why the couple after me was immediately accommodated, despite also lacking a reservation." Gregory's eyes did the same quick assessment Lena's had done, taking in Elias's casual clothes, his dark skin, his lack of visible status markers. A calculation happened behind those eyes. "I apologize for any confusion," Gregory said without sounding apologetic at all. "Our reservation system is quite complex. Those tables are indeed spoken for by guests arriving shortly." "All of them?" "Yes, sir. All of them." Elias noted how Gregory had positioned himself slightly forward, creating a barrier between Elias and the dining room. A subtle message. "You don't belong in there. Perhaps another establishment might better suit your needs tonight," Gregory suggested, his voice dropping lower. He leaned in slightly, adding with quiet firmness, "This place may not be for you." The air between them changed. Gregory's posture shifted as he became aware of the watching eyes from nearby tables. His voice, which had been low and dismissive, now lifted just enough to be heard by those dining closest to them. "Sir, perhaps there's been some confusion about the type of establishment we are." Gregory gestured at Elias's simple button-down shirt and slacks. "Verdant Table has a certain clientele who expect a particular atmosphere. Our price point typically starts at $120 per person." Elias remained perfectly still, his face composed. Behind Gregory, a couple at a corner table exchanged glances, the woman's hand rising to her mouth. "I'm aware of your prices," Elias said evenly. Lena stood slightly behind Gregory now, her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. She wouldn't meet Elias's eyes. "Then you understand that we maintain certain standards," Gregory continued, his voice carrying even further. "Our guests make reservations weeks in advance. They dress appropriately." His eyes flicked over Elias's clothing again. "They understand the dining experience we offer." A small group of businessmen at a nearby table had stopped eating to watch, one of them smirking behind his wine glass. Another table fell silent, all eyes on the scene unfolding at the entrance. "Standards," Elias repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. "And do these standards apply equally to everyone who walks through that door?" Gregory's smile tightened at the corners. "Of course." "Then perhaps you can explain why the couple who arrived after me, also without reservations, and dressed quite similarly to myself, were immediately seated at one of your apparently reserved tables." The woman who had covered her mouth now looked down at her plate. Her dining companion shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I don't need to justify our seating policies," Gregory said, a harder edge entering his voice. "If you're looking for dining options, I'd be happy to suggest several more casual establishments nearby. There's a burger place 2 blocks down that might be more." He paused. "Accessible for you." Elias didn't flinch. "I'd like a table at this restaurant," he said calmly. "The one I'm standing in right now." Gregory's performance faltered for a moment. Most people would have left by now, embarrassed or angry. Elias's continued composure seemed to unnerve him. "Sir, I've tried to be reasonable," Gregory said, voice rising. "But you're creating a disturbance for our guests who have made proper arrangements to dine here." "I'm speaking at exactly the same volume you are," Elias pointed out. I've made a simple request and asked for clarification on policies that appear inconsistently applied. The businessmen were openly watching now, one whispering to another. A woman at a different table looked uncomfortable, setting down her fork. Gregory's face flushed. He glanced around, aware of the attention they were drawing, then made a subtle gesture toward the dining room. This is becoming disruptive. I agree, said Elias. So, let me simplify. May I have a table? Yes or no? Gregory's jaw tightened. His customer service mask slipped further, revealing the contempt beneath. No, you may not. And why is that? Because, Gregory said, leaning closer. As I've explained repeatedly, Verdant Table maintains certain standards. The emphasis on those last two words made his meaning unmistakable. The discrimination was plain, even without explicit language. Elias nodded once. I see. Gregory seemed to take this as a victory. His posture relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained cold. He raised his hand, motioning toward the dining room. Trent, he called. Could you come help us resolve a situation? From across the dining area, a server looked up. Trent Harlow was in his late 20s with gelled hair and an eager expression. He nodded quickly and detoured from his path, balancing a steaming plate of pasta in one hand as he approached. He assessed the situation with a quick glance, looking from Gregory's tight smile to Elias's composed stance. The dining room grew quieter as more people noticed the confrontation. Forks paused midway to mouths. Conversations dwindled. All eyes turned to watch what would happen next. Trent arrived at the host stand, the plate of pasta still in his hand. He looked at Gregory for direction, a smirk already forming on his lips. This gentleman was just leaving, Gregory said, never taking his eyes off Elias. But perhaps he needs some assistance understanding our establishment. Trent's smirk widened as he stepped forward, the plate of pasta held before him like an offering. Trent Harlow stopped directly beside Elias Grant, the steam from the pasta plate rising between them like a thin veil. Behind him, Gregory Pike stood with his arms crossed, a half step back, just far enough to maintain deniability, but close enough to enjoy the show. His satisfied smile said everything his words couldn't. The restaurant had gone quiet. All conversations had died, replaced by the soft classical music playing through hidden speakers and the occasional clink of silverware from those pretending not to watch. Trent looked Elias up and down, his smirk growing wider. Look, man, he said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Maybe this is more your speed. He held the plate of spaghetti marinara forward as if offering it. Simple carbs, simple sauce, doesn't require a sophisticated palate. Elias didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't respond. His stillness seemed to irritate Trent, who glanced back at Gregory for reassurance. Gregory gave him a small nod of encouragement. No, Trent continued. Too fancy for you still? What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Trent lifted the plate higher, tilted it forward, and dumped the entire contents directly over Elias's head. Thick red sauce splashed across Elias's face and shoulders. Steaming pasta noodles tumbled down, catching on his jacket collar, draping over his shoulders, clinging to his shirt. The heavy ceramic plate remained in Trent's hand, but everything else, sauce, pasta, bits of basil, and parmesan now covered the man they decided didn't belong. For one perfect, terrible moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The restaurant froze in collective shock. Then the reactions came in waves. A woman at a nearby table gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, someone whispered. A man at the bar let out a nervous laugh that died quickly when no one joined him. The couple who had been seated ahead of Elias stared wide-eyed, forks suspended in midair. Phones appeared as if by magic, lifted, aimed, recording. The soft clicks of camera shutters filled the silence. Gregory didn't move to stop any of it. He stood back, watching, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and mild surprise that things had gone this far, but he made no move to intervene, no attempt to reprimand Trent or assist the sauce-covered man before him. Ellis remained perfectly still. Sauce dripped from his chin onto his shirt. A single noodle slid from his shoulder down his arm. His stillness was more frightening than any rage could have been, a contained power that filled the space around him. Across the room at the service station, Marisol Vega froze with a stack of clean napkins in her hands. Her eyes went wide with recognition as she stared at the man covered in marinara sauce. She had seen that face before in the employee handbook, in the training videos, in the old framed photographs that hung in the staff hallway. "That's Mr. Grant," she whispered in panic, her voice barely audible. "That's the owner." Only Owen Bell, a dishwasher passing by with a bin of dirty glasses, heard her. He paused, following her gaze, and paused when he realized what had happened. But fear rooted him in place. Fear of losing his job, fear of becoming the next target. He hurried back toward the kitchen without a word. Meanwhile, Elias slowly raised one hand to his face. He wiped sauce from his brow with his fingertips, looked at the red smear, then looked directly at Gregory Pike. His eyes were calm, calculating, utterly devoid of the humiliation or anger they'd hoped to provoke. "I see," he said simply. The words were quiet, but somehow carried through the silent restaurant. The two words held more weight than a shouted threat. They weren't an admission of defeat, but a promise, the beginning of something, not the end. Gregory's satisfied smile faltered, uncertainty flickering across his face for the first time. Something about Elias's tone had cut through his performance, leaving him suddenly unsure. Without another word, without raising his voice or making a scene, Elias turned away from them both. Sauce dripped from his clothing, marking his path with red droplets on the polished floor. As he walked steadily toward the kitchen, he moved with purpose and dignity despite the noodles clinging to his shoulders and the sauce staining his clothes. He left stunned guests and staff in his wake. Phones kept recording. The whispers began immediately. Gregory and Trent exchanged glances. Trent still smirking, though less confidently now. Gregory watching the retreating figure with growing unease. The kitchen doors swung open as Elias approached them. A young line cook saw him coming and stepped back in shock. The doors swung shut behind him, cutting him off from the dining room's view. In his wake, the restaurant remained frozen in a tableau of shock, shame, and morbid fascination, none of them knowing they had just witnessed the beginning of their own undoing. The kitchen doors swung wildly as Elias pushed through them. The usual clamor of pots, pans, and shouted orders died instantly. Knives stopped mid-chop. Burners hissed under empty ladles, every eye locked on the man standing before them. Marinara dripping from his shoulders onto the spotless floor. "Mr. Grant." Rafael Estio's voice cracked with shock. The head chef recognized him immediately, even beneath the sauce. Nina Baptiste, the sous chef, covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God," she whispered. Elias stood perfectly still, his face unreadable. The red sauce on his dark skin looked like blood under the harsh kitchen lights. Rafael rushed forward. "Sir, I am so sorry. I had no idea you were here tonight. What happened out there? Who did this to you?" Elias raised his hand, stopping Rafael mid-sentence. "I need 3 things right now," he said, his voice controlled and precise. The office phone, a clean towel, and the exact time. "It's 7:42, Na said quickly, glancing at the digital clock on the wall. A prep cook handed over a clean white towel. Elias took it without comment and wiped his face methodically, never breaking his calm demeanor. "This way, sir," Rafael said, leading him toward the back office. The kitchen remained frozen, staff exchanging nervous glances as Elias walked past. Inside the small office, Rafael closed the door. Elias picked up the desk phone and dialed from memory. "Sandra, Elias Grant, I'm at Verdant Table, Chicago." His voice was even, almost unnervingly so. "I need you to notify HR Legal immediately. I've just been assaulted by staff." He paused. "Yes, physically. Food dumped on me. Racial component evident." Another pause. "I'll wait." Rafael stood awkwardly by the door, watching his boss handle humiliation with a dignity that made his own stomach twist with shame. Ellis hung up and immediately dialed again. "Victor, it's Grant. I need you at Verdant Table, Chicago right now." He listened briefly. Front of house staff just committed assault with discriminatory intent against me. A shorter pause. Yes, I was the target. I came in unannounced. He nodded. Preserve all security footage immediately. I'll see you soon. One final call. Deshawn, need your team at Verdant, Chicago now. Lock down all exits. No staff leaves the building until I give clearance. He listened. Yes, we'll need the footage. And Deshawn, this is personal. He hung up and turned to Raphael, who was sweating despite the office's chill. Who hired Gregory Pike? Elias asked. Raphael swallowed hard. Regional approved him about 2 months ago. They fast-tracked him because of his experience at high-end establishments. And has anyone raised concerns about how the front staff has been treating certain guests? Raphael's eyes dropped to the floor. There have been whispers, complaints from some of the boozers. Marisol especially noticed patterns. Patterns? Elias repeated flatly. Certain guests getting worse tables, longer waits, sometimes turned away entirely. Raphael's voice grew stronger as he continued. I brought it up to Gregory twice. He dismissed it as brand positioning. Said we were cultivating a specific clientele. And you accepted that answer. Elias's voice remained level, making the question more damning. I shouldn't have, Raphael admitted, shame evident in his posture. I told myself it was front-of-house business, not my kitchen, not my problem. He looked up. I was wrong, Mr. Grant. Elias nodded once, acknowledging the confession without absolving it. He opened a small closet where a spare jacket hung, kept there for special guest appearances or emergency meetings. He removed his stained clothes and changed efficiently. Show me the security feed, he said. Raphael pulled up the dining room cameras on the office computer. The monitor displayed multiple angles of the restaurant. Gregory was visible near the host stand, speaking animatedly to Trent. Both were smiling. Guests were still stealing glances at them, some looking uncomfortable, others amused. The back door opened and Deshawn Price entered with 3 security officers in plain clothes. He nodded respectfully to Elias. All exits covered, Deshawn reported. My people will make sure nobody leaves until you say so. Good. Ellis checked his watch. 7:51, exactly 9 minutes. 9 minutes since? Raphael asked. Since they decided to destroy themselves, Ellis answered, adjusting his clean jacket cuffs. He moved toward the door that would take him back into the dining room. Raphael stepped aside, recognizing something in his boss he'd never seen before. Not anger, but something more dangerous. Pure focused resolve. Deshawn positioned his team discreetly at the exits. Elias paused at the dining room door, took one deep breath, and then pushed it open. He stepped onto the floor, composed and deadly calm. The dining room at Verdant Table had never been so quiet. The usual symphony of silverware against porcelain, wine glasses clinking, and cultured conversation died instantly as Elias Grant walked to the center of the room. He stood directly beneath the restaurant's signature chandeliers. 3 massive installations of hand-blown glass that cast warm golden light across the space he had designed with his own hands years ago. Gregory Pike froze mid-sentence, champagne flute suspended in air. Trent Harlow's smirk wavered. Lena's fingers tightened around her reservation book. Every eye in the room fixed on the man who moments before had pasta sauce dripping down his face, now transformed into something formidable. Elias waited. Let the silence stretch. Let it become uncomfortable. My name, he said finally, voice carrying to every corner without shouting, is Elias Grant. I own this restaurant. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of shock expanding outward. A woman at table 7 audibly gasped. A businessman dropped his fork with a clatter. Gregory's laughed sharp and disbelieving. That's ridiculous. The owner, as his words dried up when he spotted Raphael Estio emerging from the kitchen, flanked by Deshawn and his security team. The head chef's presence confirmed everything. Gregory's face drained of color. That's right, Elias continued, never taking his eyes off Gregory. I built this place from nothing. Designed every chair you're sitting in. Selected every ingredient on your plates. He turned slowly, addressing the entire room with deliberate calm. Tonight I witnessed something unacceptable in my restaurant. This man, he pointed to Trent, physically assaulted a guest, me, by dumping food on my head. That man, he shifted to Gregory, enabled and encouraged a pattern of discriminatory denial of service. The room remained frozen. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Phone cameras continued recording their small red lights like watchful eyes. Lena at the host stand denied me a table while seating others who arrived after me. The standards Mr. Pike referred to were clearly about my appearance, specifically my race. Trent stepped forward, panic in his eyes. "Listen, I didn't know that I owned the place." Elias cut him off. "Would it have been acceptable if I were any other black man trying to eat dinner?" Trent had no answer. "You're fired, Mr. Harlow." Elias said simply, "So are you, Mr. Pike, and you, Lena." He turned to Deshawn. "Please escort them out now." Gregory's shock transformed into rage. "You can't do this. I'll see you into the ground. You're destroying your own business." "No," Elias replied, voice still steady. "I'm removing an infection before it kills the body." He nodded to two security officers. "Take him out." Gregory fought as the men approached, knocking over a water glass. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. My brother will crush you." The security officers took Gregory by the arms, his resistance making the scene even more dramatic. As they pulled him toward the door, Elias addressed the other staff. "Any front-of-house employee who participated in or ignored discriminatory practices, you're terminated as well. The rest will be determined after review of security footage." 3 more servers and another host looked at each other nervously, then walked toward the exit before security had to remove them. Half the dining room burst into applause. An older woman stood up and shouted, "Good for you." Others kept recording, their faces a mix of shock and fascination. Elias turned to Raphael. "Chef, please ensure our guests receive complimentary dessert and wine. I apologize for the disruption." As the security team escorted the terminated staff outside, Elias felt his phone vibrate. He stepped away from the center of the room and answered. "Naomi," he greeted board member Naomi Reeve. Her voice was tight with urgency. "Elias, we have a situation. That footage is already online. Multiple angles." "That was fast," he said, watching through the window as Gregory shouted at security in the parking lot. "Too fast," Naomi agreed. "And there's more. Daniel Pike, the Sterling and Vine executive." "Yes, Gregory's older brother. He's already giving statements to food industry press claiming you had a meltdown and abused your staff." Ilas's jaw tightened. "The footage will show exactly what happened. They're using edited clips," Naomi said. "And Daniel is moving fast." "Too fast, Elias. This feels coordinated." A cold realization washed over him. Gregory was planted. "I think so," she confirmed. "The board is getting calls. This isn't just about tonight." Elias watched as the last of the fired employees disappeared into the night. "What's Daniel saying exactly?" Naomi hesitated. "He's threatening to destroy your legacy before the night is over. He claims he has information that will reveal the truth about Elias Grant and his operation." Elias felt the weight of decades of work pressing down on his shoulders. What should have been a moment of justified vindication was transforming into something darker, more calculated. "Let him try," Elias said finally, turning back to his restaurant. The tables, the lights, the guests who remained, everything he had built through years of unrelenting work. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Naomi said. "Don't do anything else public until I arrive." Elias hung up and caught Raphael's questioning look from across the room. The chef had cleared the broken glass and was doing his best to restore order, but uncertainty hung in the air like smoke. Minutes later, the once bustling dining space stood empty. The last guests had been ushered out with comped meals and apologies. Security guards remained stationed at the entrances, their faces grim in the dimmed lighting. Upstairs in Elias's office, tension filled the air. Ellis stood by the window, watching police lights flash across the street where officers were taking statements from the fired employees. The wail of sirens and persistent city noise drifted up from below, a soundtrack to the chaos unfolding. Around the conference table sat his hastily assembled crisis team. Naomi Reeve, her blazer still on despite the late hour. Sandra Lell from HR, fingers flying over her tablet. Victor Hale, legal counsel, his face etched with concern. Rafael Estió, still in his chef's whites, and Maris Solvega, the young boozer who looked both terrified and determined to be there. "Show me," Elias said, turning from the window. Naomi slid her tablet across the table. "It's already making rounds. 3 separate videos, all edited the same way." Elias pressed play. The footage began with him standing in the dining room, his voice clear. "You're fired. All of you." It showed security escorting staff out. Gregory's protests, but nothing of what happened before. No pasta dumped on his head. No denial of service. Nothing to explain his actions. "They cut everything that happened to me," he said quietly. "Deliberate," Victor confirmed, adjusting his glasses. "The narrative they're building is that you had some kind of power trip." Sandra leaned forward, her expression grave. "We'll have wrongful termination suits by morning." Gregory's already contacted former colleagues claiming hostile workplace and racial discrimination. Racial discrimination. Elias's voice was dangerously soft. "He denied me service at my own restaurant because I'm black. Which is exactly why we need to preserve every angle of security footage immediately." Victor said, "We should expect subpoenas." Sterling and Vine's legal team will move fast to secure evidence before we can present the full story. Marisol cleared her throat. Everyone turned to look at the young woman who'd been quiet until now. "Mr. Grant, I should have spoken up sooner." Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. Gregory talked about curating the room all the time. He trained the hosts to seat certain people in the back or claim we were booked when we weren't. "Did he specifically mention race?" Victor asked. Marisol nodded. "Not directly. He used code. Not our target clientele. Doesn't fit our image." But we all knew what he meant. Raphael ran a hand through his hair. "I heard similar comments when I came through the dining room. I confronted him once about turning away a black family. He said I should stick to the kitchen and leave the front of house aesthetic to him." "Did you report this?" Elias asked, his eyes narrowed. "To the assistant manager." "Yes. But she was hired by Gregory too?" Naomi's phone buzzed. She glanced down, her face darkening. "It's worse than we thought. Sterling and Vine just announced a leadership stability initiative to reassure their investors tonight." Sandra asked at this hour. "It's coordinated," Victor said. "They're trying to poach investors who might get nervous about Verdant Table after these videos." Elias walked to his desk and picked up the phone. "Get me Gregory Pike's complete hiring file now. And I want records of every guest complaint filed since he started. Every email he sent, every staff communication." Sandra nodded and stepped out to make the call. "How did we miss this?" Elias asked the room. "How did I miss this?" "Gregory's credentials were impeccable," Naomi replied. 3 years at the Windsor in New York. Glowing references. "Check if the Windsor has any connection to Sterling and Vine," Elias ordered. "And the references. I want them verified tonight." Marisol spoke up again. "I have something else." She pulled out her phone. "Gregory made us delete negative reviews that mentioned being treated differently, but I took screenshots first." Victor took her phone. "Smart. This shows pattern and intent." Raphael's phone chimed with a news alert. "They're moving even faster now." Elias came around to look at the screen. There was Daniel Pike, Gregory's older brother, his face solemn as he spoke to a local reporter outside Sterling and Vine's downtown location. "What we witnessed tonight was evidence of managerial collapse," Daniel said smoothly, his voice carrying authority. "When leadership resorts to public firings and intimidation, it speaks to deeper issues within an organization." "Turn it off," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. The room fell silent. Outside, the city continued its nighttime rhythm, unaware of the war that had just begun. "They planted Gregory to sabotage us from within," Elias said finally, to create a situation they could exploit. "This isn't just about tonight." "No," Naomi agreed. "This is calculated corporate sabotage." Victor was already making notes. "We need statements from witnesses, unedited footage, staff testimonials, and we need to get ahead of the story," Naomi added. "If we wait until morning, Daniel's narrative becomes the established truth." Elias looked around the table at the faces watching him, waiting for his direction, his decision. The weight of verdant table, of everything he'd built, rested on what he did next. The city lights glowed against the midnight sky as Elias sat hunched over his desk. The restaurant below had emptied hours ago, but the battle had only begun. Steam no longer rose from his coffee cup. The liquid had gone cold, forgotten as he reviewed security footage for the 5th time. "Play it again," Victor said, rubbing his tired eyes. "I need to see the exact moment Gregory signals to Trent." Sandra leaned closer to the screen. "There. Right there. See that nod? That's premeditated." Elias watched the footage with a stone-cold expression. The video showed everything in perfect clarity. Him being ignored while the white couple was seated. Gregory's condescending posture. The deliberate humiliation. The full footage. "Leaves no doubt," Victor said. This was targeted discrimination followed by assault. "But will it matter?" Elias asked, his voice low and growly from exhaustion. Victor shook his head. "Public opinion forms in minutes, not days. Daniel's already spinning this. By morning, your justified response will be twisted into a tantrum." Sandra gathered her notes. "I've documented 26 clear policy violations by Gregory in this one incident alone." A soft knock interrupted them. Marisol stood in the doorway, still in her work uniform, fingers nervously twisting the hem of her apron. "Come in," Elias said. "Please sit." Marisol perched on the edge of a chair, her eyes darting between the three of them. "We need to understand exactly how Gregory operated," Elias explained. "Anything you can tell us helps." She took a deep breath. He had rules not written down, just understood. "What kind of rules?" Sandra asked gently. "About guests. Who got the good tables? Who got served quickly?" Marisol's voice strengthened as she continued. "He told us once that part of our job was to protect the brand from the wrong crowd." Victor looked up sharply. "Those exact words?" "Yes." "He said some guests didn't match our image." Elias leaned forward. "Why didn't anyone report this behavior sooner?" Marisol's eyes dropped to her hands. "He scared people. He'd brag about his connections. How his brother knew all the big investors. How he had protection from above. We believed him." "Did he ever mention Sterling and Vine?" Sandra asked. "Not directly, but he took phone calls sometimes, private ones. He'd step outside and come back looking pleased with himself." Ellis checked his watch. 1:15 a.m. "Thank you, Marisol. We'll need a formal statement tomorrow, but you should go home and rest now." After she left, Elias dialed a number on speakerphone. "This better be important," answered a gruff female voice. "Judith, I need you to pull Gregory Pike's complete recruitment file from the servers now." At this hour, Judith Lane sighed. "Give me 15 minutes. While they waited, Victor outlined their legal strategy. "We need statements from supportive witnesses, the unedited footage released publicly, and a formal complaint filed against Sterling and Vine for corporate sabotage." Sandra nodded. "HR already has 3 complaints about Gregory that were mysteriously buried in the system." The phone rang at 1:52 a.m. Judith's voice crackled through the speaker. "You're not going to like this," she said. "Gregory Pike wasn't hired through our standard channels. His application came through Pinnacle Hospitality Search." "I've never approved that firm," Elias said. "Exactly." I dug deeper. Pinnacle is a subsidiary of Monarch Holdings, which, let me guess, Victor interrupted, traces back to Sterling and Vine. "Bingo," Judith confirmed. This was deliberate infiltration. And there's more. Gregory had access to financial reports, vendor contracts, customer databases, everything he'd need to damage us from within. Elias's jaw tightened. "Send everything to Victor's secure server, then check if Gregory placed any other employees we don't know about." When the call ended, the 3 sat in heavy silence. The sabotage was no longer just suspicion. It was deliberate, structural, and patient. "We can't wait until morning," Elias finally said. "By then, Daniel will have controlled the narrative completely." "What's our move?" Sandra asked. "Victor, draft a statement with the unedited footage ready to release. Sandra, prepare termination paperwork for anyone Gregory hired, and I need to call an emergency board meeting." Victor checked his watch. At 3:12 a.m., If we wait until business hours, we're already beaten, Elias replied. For the next 2 hours, they worked in focused silence. Sandra identified 6 other employees Gregory had placed throughout Verdant Table. 2 in finance, 1 in vendor relations, 3 in front of house. Victor prepared documents showing the clear pattern of infiltration and sabotage. Elias made calls to wake each board member, explaining only that an emergency required immediate attention. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, Elias stood and put on his suit jacket. His face showed the weight of the sleepless night, but his eyes remained sharp with determination. They expected me to be blindsided for days, he said. Instead, we're hitting back before breakfast. The board won't be happy about being dragged in at this hour, Sandra warned. They'll be less happy if Sterling and Vine succeeds in tanking our stock before the markets open. Elias straightened his tie and gathered his files. The city was just beginning to stir as he left the office. Morning delivery trucks rumbled past. Early commuters hurried by with coffee cups clutched in gloved hands, none of them aware of the corporate war unfolding in their midst. Elias walked with purpose toward the downtown high-rise, where the board would reluctantly gather. The coming hours would determine whether everything he had built would stand or fall. Elias stepped out of the cab into the weak morning light. His body ached from a night without sleep, but his mind remained razor-sharp, focused on the fight ahead. Behind him, downtown Chicago was just waking up. Delivery trucks rumbling past, sleepy baristas raising shop shutters, early office workers trudging toward their buildings with coffee cups clutched in gloved hands. He hadn't gone home, hadn't showered, hadn't done anything but prepare for war. The Verdant Table stood quiet, its elegant facade looking almost mournful in the pale sunrise. The restaurant wouldn't open for hours, but the corporate offices upstairs would soon host a meeting that could determine everything. Elias took 3 steps toward the entrance when movement across the street caught his eye. Workers in high-visibility vests were unfurling massive vinyl banners across the facade of what had been an empty storefront just yesterday. The Sterling and Vine logo, sleek and predatory, stretched wide above the words "coming soon." Elias stopped cold. Construction permits, design approvals, installation crews. These things took weeks, sometimes months, to arrange. This display hadn't materialized overnight by chance. They've been planning this for months, he muttered, watching as workers secured the corners of the banner with practiced efficiency. A black Bentley glided to the curb directly in front of the construction. The rear door opened and Daniel Pike stepped out, looking like he'd enjoyed a full 8 hours of sleep in Egyptian cotton sheets. His charcoal suit was crisp, his silver hair perfectly combed, his movements unhurried. He spotted Ellis almost immediately and smiled, not with surprise, but with satisfaction. Daniel said something to his driver, then strolled across the street toward Elias, with the casual confidence of a man who believed the battle already won. "Elias, I heard about last night." Daniel's voice carried just the right amount of practiced concern. "Terrible situation. That's why I always say staff training is the foundation of everything we do at Sterling and Vine." People passed by on the sidewalk. Some slowed, perhaps recognizing Elias from the viral videos now circulating online. "Spare me the performance." "Daniel." Elias nodded toward the banner. "Your timing is impressive." Daniel's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "Markets move quickly when they sense weakness. You're a businessman. You understand that?" "I understand sabotage when I see it." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice just for Elias. "Here's some advice from one professional to another. Step aside gracefully. Sell. Preserve some dignity before this story consumes you completely." "Not happening. Think about it. You're what, 58? That's a difficult age to rebuild from scratch." Daniel adjusted his sleeve, revealing a watch worth more than most people's cars. "Reputations are much easier to poison than they are to rebuild." "Is that what you did to my reputation? Poisoned it?" Daniel's smile didn't waver. "I simply recognize opportunity. Your board does too, by the way. Most of them anyway." The comment landed like a punch. Elias kept his face neutral. "You know what your problem is, Elias? You still think this is about right and wrong?" Daniel gestured vaguely toward the Verdant Table. But it's really just about winning and losing. Before Elias could respond, Daniel glanced at his watch and stepped back. I have investors to meet. You have damage control. He nodded toward the restaurant. Good luck in there. Daniel turned and walked away, leaving Elias standing on the sidewalk with the Sterling and Vine banner looming across the street like a declaration of war. Inside the Verdant table's upper floor boardroom, tension hung thick in the air. 8 board members sat around the polished table, most looking tired and irritable at being summoned so early. Naomi Reeves stood when Elias entered, her expression a mix of support and warning. You're late, said Warren Dunfield, the oldest board member. I was outside watching Sterling and Vine hang promotional banners across the street, Elias replied, taking his seat at the head of the table. Banners that would have required permits weeks ago. That's speculation, said Thomas Guerin, adjusting his glasses. What isn't speculation is the PR nightmare we're facing. Elias placed a folder on the table. We have evidence that Gregory Pike was deliberately planted in our organization by Sterling and Vine. So you fired him publicly and created a viral incident? Guerin shot back. I fired him because he denied me service at my own restaurant and had food dumped on me. Elias replied evenly. The optics are terrible, said Lindsay Wells, scrolling through something on her phone. Our stock is down 7 points in pre-market trading. The optics of racial discrimination are worse, Naomi cut in sharply. Of course they are, Lindsay said quickly. But mass firings without due process expose us to due process, Elias interrupted. I witnessed the incident personally, as did 20 guests and our security cameras. Victor Hale, who had been standing near the door, stepped forward to distribute documents. I've prepared a full legal briefing on our position. The terminations were legally sound. As the papers circulated, Elias continued, Gregory Pike's hiring bypassed our standard procedures. He came through a shell recruitment firm that traces back to Sterling and Vine. That's circumstantial, Warren said, though he looked troubled. It's deliberate corporate sabotage, Elias countered. Naomi nodded. We've identified 6 other employees placed by Gregory in key positions. All have been suspended pending investigation. The tension in the room shifted slightly. But before anyone could speak, Elias's phone rang. He recognized the number of their primary seafood supplier. Excuse me, I need to take this. He stepped away from the table. Martin, good morning. The voice on the other end sounded uncomfortable. Elias, I'm sorry to do this, but we're suspending all premium deliveries to Verdant Table effective immediately. Elias felt the room watching him. On what grounds? Our corporate office is conducting a review of brand conditions with all our partners. It's temporary, but who contacted you from corporate? Elias asked, already knowing the answer. A pause. I can't discuss that. Was it after last night's incident? Another pause. Yes. Thank you for letting me know, Martin. Elias ended the call and turned back to the board, their faces expectant. Our primary seafood supplier just suspended deliveries. They're conducting a review of brand conditions. He met each board member's eyes in turn. This isn't just about last night. Daniel Pike is trying to strangle us. The boardroom emptied as directors scattered to make calls and manage the growing crisis. Elias stood alone for a moment, staring at the empty chairs, where moments ago people had debated whether discrimination warranted his response. Judith Lane burst through the door, her tablet clutched in one hand. We need to move quickly. I've got operations reports from all departments. How bad? Elias asked. Bad enough? She replied, her efficiency masking concern. We've lost 3 more suppliers in the last hour, all using nearly identical language about reviewing partnerships. Raphael Estio appeared in the doorway next, still in his chef's whites. The kitchen team is with us, but we're running inventory now to see how long current supplies will last. Good. Elias nodded. Let's set up in the main office. The 3 moved rapidly through the restaurant, past staff exchanging worried glances. Elias noticed Sandra LOL already at work in the corner of his office, surrounded by employment files and her laptop. HR is fielding calls from every news outlet in the city, Sandra said without looking up. They all want statements about the incident. Give them nothing yet, Elias replied. Not until we understand the full scope of what we're facing. Judith had already commandeered the whiteboard, dividing it into sections. Suppliers, reservations, staff, media, legal. Under each heading, red marks began to accumulate as she logged each new problem. The produce truck turned around mid-route, Raphael said, checking his phone. They claimed there was a computer error with our account that flagged us for non-payment. That's absurd, Judith cut in. We've never missed a payment. It's not about money, Elias said quietly. It's about isolation. Sandra looked up from her files. We've received 16 wrongful termination threats already, all from lawyers using identical language. The phone rang again. Judith grabbed it, her face tightening as she listened. That was Bellini Wines, she said after hanging up. They're pausing our account pending review. I need to see Martin in person, Elias decided. He's supplied our seafood for 15 years. If anyone will stand with us, go. Judith nodded. Well, manage the incoming fires here. Elias drove himself to Martin Geller's warehouse near the docks. The bustling facility supplied premium seafood to restaurants across 3 states. Martin had been one of Elias's first supporters when Verdant Table was just opening. The receptionist recognized him but hesitated. Mr. Geller is very busy today. Tell him it's Elias Grant. 5 minutes, that's all I need. Martin appeared moments later, his usual warmth replaced by awkward discomfort. He led Elias to his cluttered office without meeting his eyes. I'm sorry about the call earlier, Martin began, shuffling papers on his desk. Corporate decisions, you know how it goes. We've known each other 15 years, Elias said. I came to your daughter's wedding. Martin finally looked up. His face pained. You think I want this? 2 Sterling and Vine executives showed up at 7 this morning. They made it clear anyone supplying Verdant Table would lose their business with all 12 of their locations. That's not just business, Elias said. That's extortion. They called it brand protection, Martin replied, his voice low. They're hitting everyone, Elias, not just me. And everyone's falling in line. Martin looked away again. They represent 8% of my business. You're 2%. I've got 37 employees and their families depending on me. Elias stood. I understand. Thank you for seeing me. For what it's worth, Martin said as Elias reached the door. I hate this. Then remember who did it to you, Elias replied. Back at Verdant Table, the situation had deteriorated further. Judith met him at the entrance, her usual composure cracking slightly. The review sites are being flooded, she reported, showing him her tablet. 1-star reviews claiming everything from food poisoning to racist staff comments. None from verified diners, organized attacks, Elias nodded. And this she turned on a nearby television where a financial news panel was mid-discussion. Question is whether Grant's emotional reaction reveals deeper instability in the company. A suited analyst was saying firing staff on the spot without proper procedures. They're calling you volatile and unpredictable. Judith said, muting the sound, as if standing up against discrimination is somehow irrational. Raphael approached with more news. We can manage dinner service tonight with what we have, but tomorrow will be impossible unless suppliers return. Sandra joined them with a folder in hand. We're getting cancellations from regulars now. The Jensen party just pulled their anniversary reservation. They've been coming for 11 years. Let me call them myself, Elias said, taking the number. In his office, he dialed and waited. A woman answered, sounding embarrassed. Mrs. Jensen, this is Elias Grant from Verdant Table. I understand you've canceled your anniversary reservation. Oh, Mr. Grant, she stammered. We just thought with everything happening, it might not be the best timing. 20 years of marriage deserve celebration, Elias said warmly, keeping any trace of disappointment from his voice. If you change your mind, your table will be waiting. It's not that we don't support you, she said quickly. We just don't want to be in the middle of controversy. I understand completely, Elias replied. I hope you have a wonderful anniversary regardless. He hung up and stared at the phone, the magnitude of the attack becoming clearer with each passing hour. Judith knocked and entered without waiting. We have another problem. I've been searching for the complaint files that should document any issues with Gregory's behavior before last night. And Elias asked, they're gone. 3 separate complaints filed by staff in the last 2 months. All missing from the system. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the private dining room, casting long shadows across the faces of Elias's assembled team. Tension hung thick in the air as Elias stood at the head of the table, his shoulders squared despite nearly 24 hours without sleep. They're trying to strangle us, Elias said. Not just the restaurant, but the truth. We need to move fast. Victor Hale adjusted his glasses. Legal paths spread before him. If this is coordinated corporate sabotage, we need concrete evidence. Suspicions won't be enough. Marisol Vega, still in her uniform, shifted nervously in her chair. She'd been quiet since entering the room, fingers twisting the edge of her apron. Marisol, Ella said gently, you mentioned Gregory often spoke about curating the clientele. Did you ever hear anything more specific? She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. I have recordings, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I started making them after what happened to Marcus. Marcus? Sandra asked, leaning forward. Another server. Gregory fired him last month after he complained about how certain guests were being treated. Marisol placed the phone on the table like it might burn her. I was scared I'd be next, so I started recording our staff meetings. Judith's eyes widened. You recorded them without permission. I know it was wrong, Marisol said, her voice strengthening. But what he was doing was worse. Victor picked up the phone carefully. This could be problematic legally, but let's hear what we have. He tapped the screen and Gregory Pike's voice filled the room. Need to understand what we're building here. Gregory was saying, not every guest fits our profile. Some people walk in. You just know they don't belong. A muffled voice asked something inaudible. Look, my brother has a bigger plan. Sterling and Vine is expanding and Verdant Table is standing in their way. We reshape this place, change the clientele, and when it falters, there's an easy acquisition. Elias's fist tightened on the table. Gregory continued. Just do what I showed you. Certain tables for certain people. The rest get the runaround. It's not about race. He laughed. Actually, it is, but we never say that part out loud. Victor stopped the recording. There's more. Marisol nodded. 3 more like that. And texts he sent me about filtering certain guests. Raphael slammed his hand on the table. That bastard was sabotaging us from inside all this time. Elias remained focused. Victor, is this enough? The attorney nodded slowly. Combined with the hiring records showing Gregory came through that shell company linked to Sterling and Vine, plus the missing complaint files Judith found. Yes, we have enough to go public with evidence of deliberate corporate sabotage. Then we don't wait, Elias decided. We hold a press conference tonight before Daniel can spin another news cycle. Sandra looked doubtful. The board. I'll inform them, not ask permission, Elias cut in. We're fighting for survival now. For the next hour, the team prepared their counterattack. Victor drafted a statement. Sandra called trusted journalists. Judith compiled financial evidence showing the suspicious timing of Sterling and Vine's expansion plans. The room hummed with renewed energy. For the first time since the pasta slid down Elias's shoulders, they felt momentum shifting. Elias stepped out briefly to notify the board of their plans. He returned looking grim. Harold Dunn is raising concerns, he reported. Says we need board approval before going public. He's stalling, Judith said. Doesn't matter, Elias replied. We proceed at 6 o'clock. At 4:45 p.m., everything collapsed. Victor's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his face fell. Judge Calloway just granted a temporary injunction, he announced. Former employees are claiming illegal surveillance and retaliatory discharge. We're prohibited from using any recordings or internal documents in public statements pending a full hearing. That's impossible, Raphael protested. How did they file so quickly? They were ready, Elias said quietly. They anticipated every move. Sandra's phone buzzed next. She checked the message and went pale. Emergency board meeting, she whispered. In 15 minutes. Virtual attendance. Elias knew instantly. Harold made his move. The next hour passed in a blur. The board convened by video call faces grim on the conference room screen. Harold Dunn, sitting in what looked suspiciously like a Sterling and Vine office, led the charge. In light of recent events and pending litigation, the board must act to protect shareholder interests, he announced. I move to temporarily remove Elias Grant as acting CEO pending full investigation of all incidents. Naomi fought back, but the votes were counted quickly. 5-4 in favor of removal. Victor leaned close to Elias. We can challenge this legally. How long would that take? Elias asked. Weeks at minimum. The restaurant wouldn't survive weeks. A security officer, one Elias had personally hired years ago, entered the room looking deeply uncomfortable. Mr. Grant, he said, avoiding eye contact. I need to collect your access credentials and keys. Raphael stood up angrily. This is wrong. It's okay, Raphael, Elias said, his voice calm as he handed over his key card and building keys. This isn't over. Elias walked slowly through his restaurant one last time. Staff watched in stunned silence. Near the host's stand where everything had begun just 24 hours earlier. He paused. I'll be back, he told Judith quietly. Then he walked through the front doors, hearing them lock automatically behind him. Across the street, Daniel Pike leaned against a sleek black car, watching the Sterling and Vine banner flapped in the evening breeze above him. When he saw Elias, a smile spread across his face. He walked over, hands in the pockets of his perfectly tailored suit. You built it, Daniel said, looking up at the Verdant table sign. I'll inherit it. The street lamps flickered on as evening settled over the city block. Ellis stood motionless on the sidewalk outside Verdant Table, the restaurant he'd built from nothing. Rain had left the pavement slick and black, reflecting the neon signs and tail lights of passing cars. Traffic hissed by, indifferent to his world collapsing. Daniel Pike's black car pulled smoothly away from the curb, its driver careful not to splash water on his expensive shoes. Through the tinted windows, Elias caught a glimpse of Daniel's satisfied smile before the car merged with traffic and disappeared around the corner. Elias didn't move. The restaurant's windows glowed warmly behind him. The light that had once welcomed him now, keeping him out. 24 hours ago, he'd been in control. Now he stood on the wrong side of his own doors. Elias. He turned to see Naomi Reeve hurrying toward him, her coat pulled tight against the evening chill. Her face was drawn, eyes burning with quiet anger. I voted against it, she said, lowering her voice despite the empty sidewalk. So did 3 others. It wasn't enough. Harold, Elias asked. Led the charge, Naomi confirmed, along with Peterson and Whitman. The timing was too perfect. The way they had arguments prepared, legal precedents cited. She shook her head. They were waiting for this. Waiting or helping create it? Elias asked. Both, I think. Naomi glanced around nervously. Harold's been taking separate meetings for weeks. I caught him once ending a call when I walked in. He claimed it was about his daughter's wedding. And now he's acting like the savior of the company, talking about steadying the ship and managing the crisis. Her disgust was plain. They're going to install him as interim CEO by morning. A soft sound made them both turn. A side door, the employee entrance, had opened halfway down the building. Marisol Vega slipped out, looking over her shoulder before quietly pulling it shut. When she spotted Elias, she hurried over, clutching her bag tightly against her chest. They're telling everyone not to talk to you, she said without preamble. Security is collecting phones from staff who were here yesterday. Are you all right? Elias asked. Marisol nodded. They don't pay attention to me. That's what Gregory never understood about people like him. They think people like me are invisible. She opened her bag slightly, revealing a phone and a folder. He was always bragging to the other managers when they thought no one could hear. Said young staff would never be believed over executives if they complained. Elias felt a spark of hope. That arrogance might be his downfall. It already is, Marisol said. She looked around nervously before continuing. I didn't just record conversations. I took pictures of everything. The special instructions he left about guest image, the scheduling system where he marked certain staff to work when specific reservations came in. Naomi stepped closer. You documented all this? I had to, Marisol said, her voice gaining strength. My cousin worked at another restaurant. Same thing happened there. Rich white manager pushing out anyone who didn't fit some image. When she complained, they fired her. Said she was lying. Marisol pulled out her phone, opened a password-protected folder. I have screenshots from the staff chat app. Gregory wasn't careful. He thought we couldn't understand what he was really saying. Elias and Naomi leaned in to see the screen. Look. Marisol scrolled through messages. Here he mentions your name, and then Daniel P. in the next message says they need to make Verdant Table less accessible before some big move. Elias read the message twice. Anger building in his chest. This isn't just about discrimination. This is targeted corporate sabotage, market manipulation, securities fraud, Naomi added. If Daniel was deliberately tanking your restaurant's value to set up an acquisition, a car slowed nearby, and all three looked up sharply. We can't stay here, Elias said. They'll be watching, Naomi nodded. And we can't use any company offices or properties. The injunction probably covers those. What about Victor? Elias asked. Good idea. Naomi pulled out her phone. He lives in Streeterville. Private building, good security. I'll text him. While she made arrangements, Ellis turned to Marisol. You're taking a huge risk. You understand that? Marisol straightened her shoulders. My abuela always said, courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are scared. Victor's response came quickly. He would meet them. Let's go, Naomi said, already signaling for a ride share. We need somewhere secure to organize everything Marisol has collected. None of them looked back at the restaurant as they left. The night was young, and dawn was many hours away. Without stopping to change clothes or rest, Elias, Naomi, and Marisol headed directly to Victor Hale's apartment. The war Daniel thought he'd won was only beginning. Late that night, Victor Hale's apartment became a war room. Legal files covered the dining table. Laptops glowed with blue light, and the city hummed beyond the windows while Elias, Victor, Naomi, Marisol, and Judith Lane worked in exhausted silence. Coffee cups piled up as the clock pushed past midnight. Then one, then two. Judith rubbed her eyes and pointed at her screen. Found another connection. The recruitment firm that placed Gregory, Pinnacle Talent Solutions. It's a shell incorporated 6 months ago. Minimal web presence. And guess who handles their accounting? MTS Partners, the same firm that manages 3 of Daniel Pike's personal holding companies. That's still circumstantial, Victor said, making notes on a legal pad. A good defense attorney would call it coincidence. Elias leaned against the window, staring at the city lights. It's not just the hiring. Look at the timing of everything. Gregory starts changing policies. Vendors begin pulling back within hours of the incident. Not days, hours. That doesn't happen without coordination. Judith clicked through more spreadsheets. I've cross-referenced the vendor withdrawals. Every single company that dropped us has major contracts with Sterling and Vine Properties. Everyone. They were afraid, Naomi said. Daniel threatened their bigger accounts if they stayed loyal to us. Victor nodded. Economic coercion. Still difficult to prove without someone willing to testify. What about the board? Elias asked. Harold flipped too quickly like he was waiting for an excuse. Naomi opened her laptop. I can access the archived board packets. Let me check what Harold has been pushing in committees. While she searched, Marisol sorted through screenshots on her phone. Gregory was always on calls he didn't want us to hear. Always stepping outside or into the office. He thought we were stupid. Not stupid, Elias said. Invisible. That's how men like Gregory and Daniel operate. They don't see the people they consider beneath them. Here, Naomi said suddenly, 3 months ago, Harold proposed changes to our emergency procurement procedures, made it easier to approve third-party management during a leadership transition without full board review. At the time, he claimed it was just modernizing our governance. He was setting the stage, Victor said, creating the mechanism they'd need for a quick takeover once they manufactured a crisis. Judith's fingers flew across her keyboard. Look at this. Sterling and Vine's recent SEC filings show they've increased cash reserves by 15%. They're positioning for an acquisition. Elias paced the length of the apartment. So Daniel places his brother in my restaurant, creates conditions for a public incident, then uses that incident to push me out and drive down our value. Meanwhile, his company is stockpiling cash, and his plant on our board has already created the procedure for a quick sale. It's market manipulation, Victor said, and conspiracy. If we can prove Daniel communicated with Gregory about the plan or with Harold about board matters while planning the sabotage, that's securities fraud. We need something undeniable, Elias said. Something that connects Daniel directly to the operational scheme. The room fell silent. Everyone felt the weight of what they were up against. Daniel Pike had resources, connections, and a head start. Marisol, who had been quiet for the past hour, suddenly sat up straighter. Wait. Gregory was bragging last week about some big investor breakfast. Said his brother was hosting it at their new showcase site, that temporary space across from Verdant Table. When? Elias asked. Tomorrow morning, 8:30. He said all the important people would be there, the ones who matter. Naomi checked her phone. That matches. I got a calendar invite last week, but declined because of another commitment. Victor raised an eyebrow. Daniel's hosting potential investors the morning after you've been removed. That's not coincidence. He's celebrating, Elias said, his voice tight. Showing off his next acquisition before it's even complete. This could be our opportunity. Victor said carefully. If we could get evidence of Daniel discussing the scheme in front of witnesses, Elias straightened his shoulders. I'm not hiding or waiting. I'm going to that breakfast. Elias, they'll have security. Naomi warned. They're not expecting me. They think I'm finished at home licking my wounds or calling my retirement planner. Elias's voice was calm but determined. Daniel wants to celebrate buying my legacy. Fine, I'll be there to congratulate him personally. Victor checked his watch. Dawn was just hours away. I'll contact people at the Securities Division and the Attorney General's office. They won't move without solid evidence, but they'll listen if we have it. He turned to Elias. Get me one clean confession or one live slip. Something where Daniel admits knowing about Gregory's actions beforehand or confirms the coordinated pressure on vendors. That's all I need. Elias nodded, already mentally preparing for the confrontation ahead. In a few hours, he would walk into the lion's den, the very room where Daniel Pike thought his victory was already secured. The investor showcase erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped as Daniel Pike backed away from the table, his eyes darting between the regulators entering the room and Elias Grant, who stood perfectly still at the center of the storm. What is the meaning of this? Daniel demanded, but his voice lacked conviction. Victor stepped forward, legal folder in hand. State financial regulators are here to investigate market manipulation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and illegal acquisition tactics. His voice cut through the noise with practiced precision. They have questions about your methods, Mr. Pike. The polished room of dark wood and brass fixtures suddenly felt smaller. Investors began edging toward the door as regulators identified themselves. Marisol stood beside Elias, her phone still recording. She looked small next to the executives in their expensive suits, but her eyes were steady. We have quite the evidence chain, Victor continued, laying documents on the table one by one. Ms. Vega's recordings of your brother explicitly mentioning your instructions. Ms. Lane's documentation of the shell recruitment firm used to place Gregory in Verdant Table. The identical language used by suppliers who suddenly canceled, all traced back to threats from your organization. Daniel's smile had vanished. This is absurd. You can't possibly. We also have internal board documents showing planning dates that preceded any incident at Verdant Table. Victor continued, nodding toward Harold Dunn, who had gone pale. And of course, your own admission just moments ago, witnessed by everyone in this room. Two investigators approached Daniel while others moved toward Harold. We'll need to ask you some questions separately, one said firmly. Harold's composure cracked first. I only attended the meetings, he blurted, eyes wide with panic. Daniel arranged everything. He said it was just standard competitive pressure. Nothing illegal. Mr. Dunn, Victor advised. You might want to wait for your attorney before continuing, but Harold was unraveling. The first meeting was 3 months ago. Daniel said Verdant Table was vulnerable if we could create the right conditions. I never touched any money. Stop talking, Harold. Daniel snapped. Through the glass doors of the showcase room, cameras flashed. News crews had gathered outside, their presence no accident. Naomi Reeves stood near the entrance, her phone in hand. After making the calls that ensured media coverage, Daniel made one last attempt to regain control. He straightened his tie and addressed the room with forced calm. "This is nothing but revenge," he announced. Mr. Grant was humiliated by his own staff's incompetence, and now he's manufacturing conspiracy theories to save face. My brother made poor choices, yes, but Sterling and Vine had nothing to do with his personal actions. One of the regulators looked up from her notes. Mr. Pike, we're particularly interested in your communications with board member Dunn regarding market positioning. Before any public incident occurred, securities fraud carries significant penalties, as does commercial bribery. The word bribery hung in the air. Daniel's face hardened as he realized the depth of his exposure. "I want my attorney," he said flatly. Within the hour, the sleek showcase room had transformed into an investigation scene. Daniel was escorted out by regulators, his phone and laptop seized. Harold Dunn sat slumped in a chair, signing a preliminary statement with shaking hands. Investors who had come to celebrate an acquisition now huddled with their own legal counsel in corners. Victor returned from a brief conference call, satisfaction evident beneath his professional demeanor. "Emergency injunctions have been filed. Sterling and Vine cannot make any move against Verdant Table or approach any board members while the investigation proceeds." Naomi's phone buzzed. She answered, listened briefly, then turned to Elias. "The board chair is calling an emergency session. They're already voting to reverse yesterday's decision." Ellis nodded, his expression revealing nothing of the exhaustion from 2 days without sleep. "Tell them I'll join shortly." Marisol looked up at him. "Did we really win?" "We stopped them," Ellis replied. "Justice takes longer." The next few hours blurred into meetings and statements. By afternoon, Elias stood in the boardroom of Verdant Table once more, this time with unanimous support. The chair formally announced his reinstatement not merely as acting CEO, but with expanded authority to restructure governance and remove any directors with compromised loyalties. As board members filed out, Naomi stayed behind. Sterling and Vine's banks just froze their expansion financing. The regulators moved faster than anyone expected. Elias watched the city through the boardroom windows, seeing not just buildings, but the world of power and consequence he had navigated his entire career. "Find Judith for me," he said quietly. Minutes later, Judith Lane entered, already carrying fresh financial reports. "I need you to begin acquisition analysis," Elias said, his voice low and certain. Judith didn't need to ask of what. She simply nodded and opened her laptop. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Chicago's downtown. The Sterling and Vine banner across the street rippled once in the wind, then went still, soon to be replaced. The Chicago skyline cut a jagged line against the afternoon sky, sunlight glinting off glass towers as Elias Grant sat motionless at the head of a long conference table. 5 days had passed since Daniel Pike's removal from the investor showcase. 5 days of emergency hearings, depositions, and financial maneuvers that had left everyone exhausted. "The final purchase agreement requires your signature, Mr. Grant." The attorney slid a thick folder across the polished surface. Elias didn't reach for it immediately. The room waited. His team, Sterling and Vine's, representatives, bank officials, and regulatory observers, all watching in tense silence. Naomi leaned forward slightly. "Elias." Sterling and Vine had collapsed with surprising speed once investigators began their work. Credit lines frozen within hours. Major investors demanding emergency board meetings by the next morning. Restaurant critics suddenly remembering quality issues they'd previously overlooked. "The terms are exactly as discussed," Victor said quietly. "Acquisition of all holdings, brands, and properties at 32% of last quarter's valuation." 32%. Not even a third of what the company had been worth before trying to destroy him. Elias finally opened the folder. The numbers were stark on the page. Sterling and Vine's counsel looked physically ill, seated across from him like a man at his own funeral. The attorney had good reason to look sick. His client had lost hundreds of millions in value in less than a week. "Where is Mr. Pike today?" Elias asked, his pen hovering over the signature line. His counsel advised him against attending. Victor replied, "The securities investigation takes priority over his corporate duties now." Judith Lane, sitting to Elias's right, touched a tablet screen. 3 criminal charges filed yesterday. 2 more expected by end of week. Elias nodded and signed his name in a single fluid motion. No dramatics, no celebration, just the scratch of pen on paper that transferred ownership of what had nearly been his destruction. "Sterling and Vine will operate under new management effective immediately," he said, closing the folder. "The brand will be rebuilt by people who understand what service means." The other side's attorney grimaced. "Mr. Grant, if I may, you may not." Elias cut him off. "The documents are executed. Your services are no longer required." The meeting disbanded with handshakes that felt like surrender on one side and justice on the other. As the room cleared, Naomi stayed behind with Elias, waiting until they were alone. 30 years building verdant table, she said. 1 week to acquire your biggest competitor. Not bad for an old dishwasher from the South Side. Ellis allowed himself a small smile. The work's just starting. Tonight we celebrate first. Naomi insisted. Raphael's been preparing since dawn. The reopening of Verdant Table felt like both resurrection and homecoming. By 7 o'clock that evening, the dining room hummed with energy. Loyal patrons, food critics, and first-time guests drawn by the story that had dominated local news. Marisol Vega moved through the space with newfound confidence, clipboard in hand, directing the new staff with quiet authority. Her promotion to floor manager had been Elias's first official act after reinstatement. Raphael Estio watched from the kitchen doorway, nodding approval at her handling of a complicated seating arrangement. "You were right about her," Raphael told Ellis as they observed the dining room. "She sees everything." "People underestimated her," Ellis replied. "That was their mistake." The kitchen staff worked with renewed purpose, sending out plates that showcased Raphael's vision without compromise. Every server had been personally interviewed by both Elias and Marisol, with clear understanding of the values that would define service. Near the bar, Naomi raised a glass when she caught Elias's eye. She'd brought several board members who'd stood firm during the crisis, making it clear which directors would remain in the restructuring. "To survival," she said when Elias joined them briefly. "To justice," he corrected, touching his water glass to her wine. Through the front windows, workers across the street removed the temporary Sterling and Vine banner that had appeared so smugly just days before. In its place, a new sign was being carefully positioned. Grant Collective. Elias excused himself from Naomi's group when he noticed an older couple hesitating at the entrance. He walked to the door himself and opened it wide. "Welcome to Verdant Table," he said warmly. The woman looked startled. "Are you Elias Grant?" he confirmed, extending his hand. "Please come in." "We canceled our reservation last week," the man admitted, shame coloring his voice. "We weren't sure." "The past is settled," Elias said, guiding them inside. "Tonight is about moving forward." As the couple followed the host to their table, Elias remained at the open door, taking a moment to look across the street. The new sign was fully in place now, lit from within against the darkening sky. Grant Collective. Daniel Pike had tried to erase him, his reputation, his business, his legacy. Instead, Pike's own company now bore Elias's name. Not out of vengeance, but as testament to a simple truth. What is built with integrity cannot be so easily destroyed. Elias turned back to the warm light and conversation of his restaurant. Another party approached the entrance, and he straightened his shoulders, ready to welcome them properly. "Good evening," he said. "Please come in." If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.